Did you know Apple ProRes was introduced all the way back in 2007? But I think it would be extremely unfair if one was to say that Apple introduced old tech as a new feature in the iPhone 13 Pros, because ProRes just so happens to be the industry standard, and it will likely remain that way for the foreseeable future. As for present day, you have ProRes on the camera you literally walk around town with. That being said, if you're expecting to see a quantum leap in image quality right upon turning that ProRes toggle on, then I'm sorry to disappoint. It's important to understand that there are two sides to this story. I would say that a whole 50% of the value ProRes holds lies in the form of editing performance in post. But that is not to say that there is no visible difference at all in image quality, because there most certainly is. In terms of bit depth, if you've got Dolby Vision HDR turned on, then you'll be recording in 10-bit regardless of ProRes or HEVC. But there is a difference when it comes to chroma sampling. In ProRes, the color is sampled at 422 as opposed to only 420 in HEVC. Now, unless you're quite well versed in digital imaging, this all probably sounds very confusing. So let's skip to the part where I show you the difference. You'll notice with the 422 on ProRes, there is better color fidelity. That means it's a more exact representation of what's actually there. Especially in a scene like this, where there is extremely dense color detail, you can see that the ProRes clip is doing a better job at holding all that color detail together. Aside from that, I also found a bonus little tidbit for you, not necessarily related to image quality, but to sound quality. The sample rate is slightly higher when you record in ProRes. It's typically 44.1 kHz when you record in HEVC, but it goes up to 48 kHz in ProRes. The more you know. For those of you who might be familiar with the ProRes family of codecs, you would know that the codec is available in a few different flavors. Although it's not explicitly stated which version of ProRes the iPhone records in, it really doesn't take much to find out that it's doing ProRes 422HQ. That's the highest quality version of ProRes with 422 chroma sampling. The official ProRes white paper describes 422HQ as a visually lossless format. That means it's extremely resistant against something called generation loss. Generation loss is referring to the loss of quality when you put the same video file through multiple passes of exporting. Imagine taking a video file, exporting it, then re-importing it, and exporting it again. Without context, that sounds extremely unnecessary, but it's actually absolutely necessary in more elaborate workflows. Take for instance exporting a section of a project for a visual effects artist. The artist would then export back a version with the effects applied, which you would then import to the master timeline and have it rendered once more during the final export. If it weren't for ProRes, the quality of that clip would have degraded significantly. That is why ProRes is the perfect intermediary format for stuff like this. And that brings us back to ProRes on the iPhone. Because of its outstanding ability to retain image quality and also being a lot less compressed compared to H.264 or H.265, ProRes footage shot on the iPhone fares much better when you make adjustments to the image in post. The image is less likely to fall apart when you apply heavy color correction or grading. Again, to show you the difference as clearly as possible, here's another extreme example. This clip was underexposed intentionally, and if I try to drastically pull detail out of those shadows, you can see it just completely falling apart into a smudgy mess on the HEVC, while the ProRes is keeping it together incredibly well. But because ProRes is not heavily compressed, all that quality does come at the expense of file size. A minute of 4K 30p footage will net you around 6 GB, which is expected out of ProRes HQ, but that also means being prepared to transfer large video files from your iPhone to your computer for editing. I would highly recommend doing it over a cabled connection using image capture because it's significantly faster than using AirDrop. A 1-minute clip just under 6 GB took about 4 minutes to transfer over AirDrop, while it only took around 2.5 minutes over image capture. This very high bitrate is likely also the reason ProRes recording is limited to 4K 30p on the iPhone 13 Pros. On my 1TB model, out of the box without much else occupying the storage, I had just over 2 hours of recording time at ProRes 4K 30p. Hypothetically, if 60p at 422HQ was going to be available, it would amount to a target bitrate of 1768 megabits per second, or 795 gigabytes per hour of footage. You see, every video codec must make trade-offs between three key characteristics: file size, image quality, and editing performance. You can never quite have the best of all three at once, so ProRes, while not necessarily having the biggest advantage in terms of file size, does offer huge advantages in terms of image quality and editing performance. In this case, it's kind of a pick 2 out of 3 scenario. So we know ProRes has great image quality. Now comes the other half of the equation. Because ProRes files have low complexity, your computer does not have to work as hard to decode the ProRes file. Think of it as being easier for your computer to digest, especially considering the alternative to be HEVC, which is highly complex and very resource intensive to even play back. That ultimately translates to a drastically more fluid editing experience when it comes to ProRes. You can see here, scrubbing through 3 layers of ProRes video in FCP is so much smoother than 3 layers of HEVC. You can also view the introduction of ProRes on iPhone as Apple adding more value to their overall product ecosystem. The new M1 Pro and M1 Max chips have dedicated accelerators for ProRes, which further propels the arguments that ProRes delivers a huge advantage in post. And now the footage that you shoot on your iPhone is able to benefit from that. This is essentially Apple creating even more synergy between the iPhone and Mac product lines. There is also a byproduct arising out of the iPhone's ability to record ProRes that not many people are talking about, but thanks to the iPhone now being able to record ProRes, all the iPhone 13s now have the ability to play ProRes video back natively. I always like to airdrop videos I edit on my Mac to see what it looks like on my iPhone, and previously playback simply wasn't possible if I exported in ProRes. Well, now it even comes with the ability to edit ProRes videos, including in third-party apps like LumaFusion. To my knowledge, this functionality is currently available on these devices only. So now the million-dollar question. When should I shoot in ProRes on my iPhone? Well, for me, the key consideration is to shoot in ProRes when you're expecting to do moderate to heavy post-production. For example, if you're shooting a short film on your iPhone. You can also shoot in ProRes when you plan to intercut iPhone footage alongside footage from big main cameras. You would shoot in ProRes for maximum quality out of the iPhone. This way there's more continuity with the professional cameras. It's not uncommon to throw in an iPhone for additional angles when shooting certain scenes, and now that bonus iPhone angle happens to be available in ProRes. But if you find yourself still struggling to find a use case for shooting ProRes on your iPhone, just think of it as an additional option for your consideration. You might not need it now, but it's there for you when you do. For me, I personally appreciate the fact that there is the option to preserve as much of my image as possible at the time of shooting, and I still am pleasantly surprised that it is now possible to shoot ProRes on a phone. So after all that, I sure hope you got something out of this video, and if you did, maybe I'll just see you in one of my other ones.